All right. Well, I am happy to be here. You'll kind of see my Princess Leia ears floating in and out. I'm using my husband's gaming headset, so I always kind of look like an air traffic controller when I do these classes. Thank you for the intro. Martha and Nicole have facilitated many of my classes, and I look forward to talking with you about this today, but also answering any questions that you might have, even if it doesn't feel like it fits here. I'd much rather answer that. Feel free to unmute or put it in the chat at any time. And I will hang around afterwards for a little bit. If you have a question that may not feel like you want to ask it in front of everybody, that's often the case in the HR world. So I will hang around afterwards if you have anything that you want to bring up. So what I want to talk about today is, as I was mentioning, Martha and Nicole and I were talking before class started. This is something I feel like I've been talking about for at least a year and a half, particularly for the last year and a half, but certainly for a long time in my leadership and development type classes, both in the classes that I've taken and the classes that I've taught. And that is this concept, of empathic leadership. And you can substitute the word empathetic if you'd like, if that makes more sense to you. But this is the phraseology I've chosen. You pick whatever you'd like. So what we're going to do in a very brief hour today is talk about what it is, why is it so important, and how do we apply that in today's challenging times, both in public service, but also in public service in a pandemic environment, which seems to change all the time. And in many cases in management positions, we are encouraged to look ahead, and that has become very challenging. I thought we'd be in a very different place right now in relationship with the pandemic than we were the last time I was on to talk about things, which was, I believe, in April. And so we are in a very different spot, and sometimes making decisions that may be hard and hard on our people, and in setting a good example. First thing I want to do, I'm going to ask you to put stuff in the chat. So if you're kind of tangentially listening, make sure you're at least near a keyboard somewhere. But first, what I want you to do is we have a little poll for you. If you had to give your leadership performance a review, how many stars would you give it? So Nicole's popped the poll up there. Let's see. And this is anonymous too. I don't have names attached to this. Okay, let's see here. Got all but one of you. Majority of you have settled right in the good, safe spot, right? The 3 depends on the day. Some are good and some not so good. I do notice we don't have a 5, and we have a couple 1s and 2s there. What I'd like to do today, my goal for any class that I teach, and any session, webinar I do, or anything, is I'd like you to think. I can only present the information, hopefully in a way that is digestible and allows you to do some thinking when you get out of here. Very often, this is about you. Most often, it's about you, but very often, as people, we tend to project it on what other people are doing. So I encourage you to stay self-focused when we're talking about this and see where you are. And hopefully, you'll pick up some tips to help move you from the 1s and 2s and sometimes 3s to the 3s, 4s, and sometimes 5s. Yeah. Good. So the other thing I would like to gather some information about is to have you put this in the chat. What are the qualities? What do you feel are the qualities of a good leader? These can be 1 or 2 word tidbits, but go ahead and put that in the chat. Along with your name if you haven't done that already. I'll throw the gimme out there considering the name of this class. So what other qualities do you feel like there's a good leader? Listener, good. Communication, understanding, being honest, right? Fair, right? Good. Respect of others, right? Flexibility and vision for the whole picture. Being fair, team player, good. I think you'll see a lot of these mentioned today. Communication is without a doubt the most important skill that you possess as a person, but particularly in a supervisory position, and being able to be effective in that communication. And that does include listening and being fair and being a team player and all those things. Show that you value everyone's contributions. Good. And you can see on this list that sometimes your day-to-day challenges may make this more challenging. It just sets up a situation where sometimes this is harder to do. Okay? I'm under no illusion that leadership is easy. Leadership, being in a supervisor, being in a supervisory position is difficult at best. And unfortunately, and I think I'm speaking for HR people too, we're not that good at explaining that real well, right? We want you to take on leadership roles and supervisory roles because you've demonstrated the fact that you have the potential to be a good leader, because you're an expert in your field. Hopefully you're not getting a supervisory position just because you've managed to survive the longest in that job. I hope we're getting away from that in our selection criteria. And while that is all true, that is all undoubtedly why you are in the positions you're in, then we don't cultivate that afterward. And we rely on people to do it themselves. And so that's why webinars like this are perfect. All right, so let's focus on this empathic leadership concept. And just when I found this graphic and I liked it because a lot of it you've already hit in the things that you said, the qualities of a good leader. But you'll see on here, we've got things like encouragement, support, integrity, inspiration. That's a pretty tall order for supervisors to meet. So the thing that's missing, I'm afraid, is in the great divide between employees and leadership is empathy. And so that's why I call it the empathy gap. And that's what we're trying to fill in today. And I think you'll find a deeper level of connection with your employees and with the people you work with when you cultivate and try to bridge this gap between these two groups of people. So what is this? It is being able to understand the needs of others. So a lot of your answers in the chat about understanding, being fair, respectful of others, and showing that you value everyone's contributions, these are cornerstones of what I call and others call empathic or empathetic leadership. So being able to understand the needs of others, it means that you're aware of their feelings and how it impacts their perception. This is a pretty advanced communication theory, far beyond just I have an idea and I'm going to send it to you. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with how they see things, but being empathetic means that you're willing and able to appreciate what the other person is going through. So this takes you getting outside of yourself and understanding where others are coming from. I think the place where we have a difficult time is when that place that they're coming from comes across as an excuse for subpar performance, for difficulty in getting along with others or any other thing. And so sometimes supervisors just want to say, I don't want anything to do with that. This is the job, I need you to do it. Okay. Feelings are messy and they are impossible to control. And we as people, particularly in positions of management, want to be able to control things. And there's a certain amount of expectation of that, but you can't control everything. Okay. So let's look at the 5 W's and the how of this, and why it's so important, who to do it with, what is it? First of all, why does it matter? So if you take the time to understand the needs of your employees, you can better provide them with the support that they need. It helps build a sense of trust. It helps builds a sense of openness, and strengthens the relationship that you have with your employees. It can also strengthen the relationships that employees have with one another. When that is in an environment and a culture that you have helped to create and promote and perpetuate, people are going to be at a different comfort level coming into that environment. What is the most important trait of empathetic people? It is the ability to listen. And furthermore, listen with the intent to understand, not with the intent to reply. I'll do that in the next slide. So empathetic people listen attentively to what you're telling them. In body language universe, it's almost as if they are leaning forward. Okay, when they are talking, you are physically, you're in it. Okay. Best quality, best trait that a leader can have is the ability to close their mouth. And we expect leaders and supervisors to know things and direct and those types of things, but sometimes the best thing you can do is not talk. And that helps deepen understanding of yourself, of your employees, and really creates that environment in which they are really comfortable. I have a supervisor now. I've been through 3 county managers in my time. I've worked in the organization I work in, it's local government in North Carolina, for almost 25 years now. It'll be 25 years in November. And I've always reported to the county manager. I've had 3 county managers. The county manager that I started with and the one I'm going to end with, I hope, have an innate ability to listen and to really be respectful of my point of view, where I am in my career, in my life, and all of those things. And that has, to me, I don't have to worry about that as an employee. And that's good because I have plenty of things to worry about in my job. But it's nice to know that when I go to them, when I went to the one initially and also go to this one, that they are listening with the intent to understand where I'm coming from. Okay. If any of you have ever read Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I encourage you to do so if you haven't done it. It's a very easy read. I teach a lot on his concepts, and I have a favorite because I'm a geek, and I do have a favorite habit, and that is habit 5, which is seek first to understand and then be understood. So when people are speaking to us or communicating with us in some fashion, we're usually listening at one of 4 levels. We're not ignoring, or we're ignoring them. We're not really listening to them at all. We're pretending with the and kind of head nods. That's number 2 is the for me, husband watching TV and I'm trying to have a conversation with him. That's number 2. He's not listening to me, really. We selectively listen when we only hear parts of what is being said to us or communicated to us. And then we also have this attentive listening. We're really focusing and paying attention to the words. The problem is only about like a maximum of 15% of communication is the words. So it really requires this 5th level that takes far more effort, and that is empathic listening. And that is really trying to get inside a person's frame of reference and see the world as they see it. That's what gets you true understanding of where people are coming from and helps you bridge that gap. So what role does this have in leadership? Instilling a sense of empathy in how you lead those under your care offers a number of advantages. It allows us to feel safe with our failures. It allows employees particularly to feel safe with their failures because we won't simply be blamed for them. It encourages leaders to understand the root cause behind poor performance. It doesn't have to mean that it's an excuse for, as I mentioned earlier, but it allows you to apply the effort as a supervisor or as a leader where it is best utilized. It helps you help others who are struggling to improve and excel. And it helps you build that relationship with those that you lead. It is a lot of times when I hear people complain about their boss, it is a sport here in the United States, because I expect that. I expect my employees to complain about me, and I tell them that. I encourage people who are coming to work for me directly to talk to the other people that work for me directly without me there, to get a real idea of what it's like to work in the environment I have tried to cultivate. And as an aside, I would not score myself as a 5 on that poll we took either. So I don't think my employees think I'm great. I think I have great days, and other days I go home and I know I have not done the right thing. And I have learned some lessons very much the hard way, as I'm sure many of you have. But it does allow us to build relationships with those people around us. And when I hear supervisors say, I treat everybody the same, you can't. You can treat everybody fairly, and you can treat everybody equitably, but you can't treat them the same because they're not the same people, which is why, particularly if you supervise a number of people, it can be exhausting trying to meet everybody where they are. I have before everybody came in to the room, we were talking about generational challenges. And I taught a class last week on generational differences, and new to the workforce, or newer to the workforce, is the centennial generation, those people who were born 1996 and to the present. We had somebody new start with us who was born in 1999 the other day, and I stopped counting a long time ago about, this person started when I was graduating from high school. I stopped that because it's too depressing. But one of these centennials in my class made a comment that she felt like her generation would be the one that brought physical and mental health and self-care more prominently into the workplace. And I don't doubt that a bit, because there are things that I've never used the phrase self-care in my life as it relates to my work. But I'm hearing it more and more. And so that to me is part of that empathy gap for me, that this is important to them. And I have a number of millennials under my supervision that I hear this from more often, especially younger millennials. And so that is like new things get added to this gap for me. And so that's why it requires a continuous examination of where you are and what you hope to accomplish. So why don't we do this if it makes so much sense? I mean, it sounds, this is it, right? This is the connection between the leadership and the employees, and why aren't we doing this? Because it takes time, and we're all really, really busy. So demonstrating empathy is hard. It's not always easy to understand why an employee thinks or feels the way they do about a situation. We have to ask questions that we may not want an answer to, so we just don't. And it means putting others ahead of yourself, which can be very challenging. And unfortunately, many organizations are focused on achieving goals no matter what the cost to employees. And I hope that's not the case. In public service, it's a little harder because we're not trying to make stuff or make money or things, but we do get caught up sometimes in expectations, or what we feel are like expectations from boards, committees, public, and so forth. And so sometimes that can clash with where employees are and how they're feeling about their job. This has all been heightened during the pandemic, particularly if you have folks that some are working from home, some are not. And there, at least last year particularly, we had a lot of friction around that. And how do you supervise in a different way? If you had remote workers, it got even harder. It was hard to begin with, and then we made it even harder by sending people out of your site. So we don't do this, even though it makes sense, because it even outlined in the qualities of a good leader that you put in the chat. Even knowing you want to work on your own leadership style and know that this is an area in which to do that, it's still hard. So now our goal is to make sure that we do carve out time for that, that it is a critical part of how we conduct ourselves with our employees. And it's something that does have value. So how do you do this? How do you create this culture of empathy? It is a delicate balance for sure, because you're not trying to have it be I'm a culture in which employees get whatever they want, right? But you want to focus on fulfilling this collective purpose of creating something meaningful, especially with younger generations. This is important. It's a recognition of where they are, what motivates them, and how does what you do, what are your job duties, and how does that match up and fulfill that? So understanding that inner purpose that drives each of your employees and aligning that with the organizational goals. It requires you to be more open about their ideas and thinking and asking employees their thoughts on it. Here's where we start to get into danger territory for leadership. We have to ask people what they think and not sit back and theorize what we think they need. And government employees particularly are very good at this, because we're the government and we're here to help you. So part of what we do on the daily is try to get out ahead of the citizenry, the public customers that we have in the Kentucky Transportation Center. You're trying to anticipate what types of courses that are going to be appealing and needed by your clientele across the state. And it's so critical to ask. When we ask these types of questions, sometimes we're putting ourselves out there. And is there anything more that you need from me as a leader, and from us as an organization? Sometimes that can be a really scary question, because the answers you may not be able to solve. You may not be able to solve that problem right away. So we just avoid asking. So it really does this does require a commitment to a more open and understanding culture in your workplace. Now, let me say this before I move on. This requires a lot of backfill. Okay? So if you walk into your staff meeting after this, yes, I took this webinar and now I am ready to work on myself. And you walk into your staff meeting in 2 hours and say, okay, folks, I want you to tell me what you think of me. Because I'm working on my empathy. I can tell you, if you're in one of those 1 or 2 categories, stars that you gave yourself, or if that's not normal in your organization, you're going to get a lot of deer in the headlights. You're going to get a lot of deer in the headlights look of, oh gosh, if I answer this question the way I really want to answer this question, I'm going to get myself in so much trouble. So that may be an endpoint for you. But start making small measurable steps for yourself before you get into before you get to that point, if it's needed. Now, if you've already have that environment, then great. That's wonderful, where you can openly ask it. But if you've not created that environment yet, you're going to have to take these little steps before you get there, and build that trust and understanding with your employees, and know that that's something you respect and value in them. So while I would love for this webinar to stick with you, it may unravel something if you do it too quickly. Okay? So how does it help you be a better leader? You do gain a greater awareness of the needs of your employees. And there is a concept that Covey, the next habit of Covey's, is actually this idea of 1 + 1 = 3. And I think about that a lot. This is the hidden multiplier. Empathy is the hidden multiplier in that equation. That when you understand the needs and motivations of your employees and you understand them as people, individually, they're going to be more productive, and together they will be more productive. You want communication to be open. You want communication to be just open and effective, and also get more effective feedback. I found this to be the case, this backfill thing I was just talking about. When we rolled out 360 evaluations were very popular in the HR world a few years ago, where you do your performance evaluation and you get feedback from your boss, which is normal, peers, subordinates, and everybody around you gives feedback. The problem is we didn't train anybody how to give feedback. So the feedback we were getting from employees about their supervisors was not effective feedback at all, because this was their opportunity to take a shot. And those quickly fell out of favor, at least in my organization they did. But that was partially because we let it happen. I mean, we kind of created that situation in which it was going to happen. Okay? So having this open and communicative relationship that is based in understanding one another also helps foster better feedback and communication. It allows us to understand and explore those problems that employees face. And it helps you give them some validation about what they're going through. Everybody's at a different place in their life experiences. When we have new people come on board, particularly younger people, and I'm trying to, I don't see all the new hires anymore, but our benefits manager does, and I usually try to pop in there. But during orientation, one of the things I say to new employees is, if you are going to spend any length of time here, we are going to go through a major life event with you. You're going to get married, you're going to get divorced, you're going to have kids, you're going to lose somebody close to you, you're going to be sick, something is going to happen. And we want you to know that we recognize that. Life happens, and it is often hard. So that is our goal in HR, is to serve you the best so that you can serve other people. But just validating that up front, I think helps set a tone for their interaction with my office. When you are working with folks that are under your supervision, you're doing that every day. I'm doing that as a one shot when I see them. But then I've got to make sure that the accessibility that they have to the folks in my office backs that up. And recognizing that people do go through some things while they're here. So here's, for those of you who are very fact-based, I wanted to throw some of these in there. Just some statistics, particularly about empathic leadership and how it statistically impacts groups of people. Leaders who show their employees empathy help drive innovation and employee engagement, specifically for women of color. It also helps to reduce burnout and reduce their intent to resign. I get that some people have always got a resignation letter undated in their desk drawer so they can whip it out and throw it at you. I'm not talking about those people. But as hard as work has been, especially lately, and this idea, I'm sure you've heard of it, I've seen it in our organization some, the great resignation that is happening. People choosing to just get out of the field. We've had a lot of people leaving law enforcement completely, just chucking in the towel. We had 3 investigators in our organization that had been there 10 plus years, who have just decided 2 are going to sell real estate and 1 is running a CrossFit gym, just completely out of law enforcement entirely. And we're seeing more and more of people being willing to they're just burned out, and they're leaving. But how do we make that difficult for them? Okay? Make it difficult to burn out. It is when we recognize that they are just not a piece in the machinery. So employees who have empathic leadership in this particular study reported higher levels of creativity and engagement. When you know your ideas and your point of view and just you as a person are being heard and understood, you don't have to put effort into it. If you're always worried, just think about it, you only got so much energy as an employee. And if you have to devote some of your energy to the idea and the thought and what it means to the rest of your performance that you don't feel like you're being understood or feel like you're being valued. That means you have less energy to spend on other things like your actual job. So for those who don't have what they would label as empathic leaders, only 13% reported higher levels of creativity, and 32% felt like they were engaged. So a significant difference in creativity and engagement levels. 86% of employees with empathic senior leaders reported feeling their life experiences were respected and valued by their employers, versus a 45% of employees. It's also important that if you have influence on your entire organizational culture, and I am in a position in my organization where I do have that it's not just HR Carolyn saying that it is the organization validating that. That is not something that's going to change overnight, but I do my part in my department and across the organization to model that behavior. For women, this is specifically white women that were polled in this category. 57% of white women who feel that their life experiences are respected and valued by their company reported never or rarely thinking about leaving their organization. And we still do have a sense of loyalty in us as employees, and what we do requires a level of commitment, I think, to larger concepts of public governance and public service that some other occupations do not, which means that's an important concept. Burnout is slightly higher in women, particularly. 63% of women with less empathic leaders reported COVID-19 related burnout, compared with 54% of women who have empathic leadership. That's not as huge of a percent increase. COVID's going to cause some burnout, particularly in healthcare fields, right? And there are some significant differences for women of color who, in the areas of leaving their company, and also whose life experiences are respected and valued. You have them too. I think that's the thing that, as a person in leadership, stuff happens to everybody, not just the employees. So everybody's going through these life experiences, and we want to be understood. But if we're not listening to understand other people, how in the world do we ever expect to be understood if they're not doing it for us too? And it's a two-way street. Unfortunately, I think we run on parallel paths sometimes, and we miss that. So many of you may have heard of emotional intelligence. It's a very popular concept and it's really the ability to understand and manage your own emotions and those of the people around you. So and some of these personality tests that are given, assessments, sometimes pre-employment assessments, try to measure this. People who have high emotional intelligence know what they're feeling, know what their emotions mean, and how their emotions can affect other people. Emotional intelligence is strongly tied to effective empathic leadership. High emotional intelligence tends to equal higher levels of empathic leadership, because the emotions is not a scary thing. It's a thing. So let's talk briefly about public sector leadership. Because I've mentioned a couple times, it's a little bit different, because our customers are sometimes always changing, but sometimes always staying the same. So that can be challenging in itself. So there's a lot of words on this slide, but I'm going to sum it up as best I can. First is to practice active listening, and that is actively trying to understand what the person is saying, mirroring it back to them. That's that event. So what I'm hearing you say is, let me make sure I understand where you're coming from. Those kinds of phrases, rather than focusing part of your attention on what you're going to say next. Listen with the intent to understand, not with the intent to reply. And I do this, I teach this all the time, and I do it. I can be sitting there talking to somebody and say, oh, when I take a deep breath, I'm going to say this. that's a flashpoint for you to say, wait, slow down. Let me make sure I understand what they're saying before I come at it with a response. Make the person in front of you feel like the most important thing to you while they're speaking, because you would want it for yourself. These are things I hear from employees. My boss doesn't listen to me. My boss doesn't understand where I'm coming from. I hear that, or they don't care where I'm coming from. So these are all things that you can do to make sure that that's not being said and felt. Okay. Understand yourself. This is the you part of it. Don't pretend your feelings don't affect you. It will impact how well you can hear somebody or put themselves in your shoes. I have had times where I don't get angry very often. I'm happy about that. I don't have a quick temper, but when I am, I know it. And I have said on more than one occasion, I am too angry to talk about this right now. So let me get my thoughts together in a more constructive way, and then we can discuss this. And I find it keeps me, that takes a lot of effort on my part, because what I want to do is reach out and punch you right in the throat, right? That's a very real feeling. So how do I turn that into something more constructive? But it takes some effort on my part. You can only control your emotions to something. And you can know what the other person's are. You can't make them not be angry at you. Or they can't make you not be angry at them. But you do have an ability to understand what your emotions mean and what it means for your interaction with that person. Okay? Be patient. It means if you are having a meeting that this may be an issue where you are having to listen to different points of view, it takes some time. So it'll be easier, but it is a skill and a habit that's going to take some time to master, and you're going to have to carve out time to do that. I have a bi-weekly meeting with one of the analysts that works for me, and I don't have an agenda when I meet with her. She has things she wants to talk to me about, but it's really her time, and I try to dedicate that time to her. And if it goes a half an hour, I always schedule a little bit more time than I intend. I never bump up a meeting right behind it if I can help it, because I want her to. Because some days it's short, and some days it's a little bit longer. But that is the focus of my attention at that moment. So it does take. It's like that constant thing that's got to be in your forefront of your brain. Okay? Track your progress, even if it's your own tracking of progress. Say, I took this, even if it's right after this class, and I'm going to start kind of seeing how I'm doing along the way, and ask for feedback where it's appropriate. Find ways to see things from other people's perspective, especially from if you're doing any kind of public policy, you're responsible for how your customers, the citizens and residents of your jurisdictions, see you and interact with you. This idea of human-centered design is to approach a system or process from the standpoint of the person who's going to use it, not from your, and this is a different way of looking at things. And so that involves keeping a handle on what's going on so that the way you intend things to be delivered and understood is actually happening. This last one, I saw this in one of the articles, and I've got some source articles listed at the end here. And I just kind of laughed at this because it had Dungeons and Dragons in it. My husband, i.e. the Princess Leia headphones here, is a big gamer. And he is forever the role of he's got like a dragon character he's created, all kinds of stuff. But one of the ways that that helps you put yourself in someone else's shoes is to actively find ways to kind of live vicariously through it. Most people find this outlet in reading fiction, because you're really able to put yourself in someone else's thoughts and feelings, even artificially in a book. But if you really want to challenge yourself, try a role-playing game where you have to be somebody else, and think about all the seminars and classes you've gone to in your career And as soon as the instructor says, all right, we're going to do a role play, everybody goes, oh God, I hate those things, right? It's because it's hard. It's hard to get outside yourself and try to absorb a different viewpoint on something and then be able to see it from that perspective. That's why this doesn't often come naturally. For some it does, but others, it's those people rolling their eyes in the training sessions. But it is interesting. So I put it in there just because I think, yeah, it's, if you're trying to inhabit another persona, it's a good training for doing this on a daily with your staff. Okay. So let's talk real briefly about coronavirus. And I think when I'm 20 years from now, when I see this picture, I'm going to know what it is. This is kind of the universal COVID virus. But the National Institute for Healthcare Management had put out some good statistics that I want to share with you and how it impacts mental health and workplace well-being. And that's what we're getting at with this, is this empathy gap can help, bridging this empathy gap can help with workplace well-being and how your employees approach work. And we've had some people who've worked from home exclusively. That was challenging when people started returning to the office. But many employees report that factors impacting mental health have worsened with the pandemic, including things like motivation at work, morale, productivity, stress at work, particularly on-site stress at work has jumped during the pandemic. And being able to maintain a good and healthy work-life balance. So how are employers addressing this and addressing and prioritizing workplace well-being, mental wellness at work? I think it is, here's some ideas. Being able to talk about it candidly with employees, that's part of that relationship building and that empathy gap. And people have tried any number of things. I have found that just talking through it with folks, that work seems to be a safer spot, at least for the folks in HR, but that they have all these other things going on, but they come back to work because they know it can be part of them at work and is not considered to be something separate. For years, I've heard the things, work is work, leave your home life at home. People can't do that. I think that's an unrealistic expectation of leaders and supervisors, because it's going to bleed in or explode in the workplace. Okay? So being able to be flexible as you can be, understanding as you can be, recognizing that people have been impacted by COVID in different ways. We have one of my employees whose brother-in-law is on a ventilator right now. Her sister has COVID, her niece has COVID, her brother-in-law is in the hospital. None of them are vaccinated. She struggled for some time with the idea of being vaccinated, did finally get vaccinated, but was not able to convince her entire family. And she's bringing that to work with her every day, as he has been in ICU for a week now. And so that's impacting her ability to focus. It's impacting her ability to talk about it. And she is the one I was mentioning to Martha and Nicole earlier, we have implemented a provide proof of vaccine or weekly test mandate that goes into effect October 4th. She is the one who's collecting that information. So now she's got this personal thing going on. And at work, she is being confronted with people who are either turning in their vaccination proof or not willing to do so, or not willing to get the shot and complaining about the mandate and so forth. So recognizing that, we're trying to take some of that off of her while she's working through this other thing. So be as flexible as you can. Be self-aware. This is kind of the theme of this entire thing. Be self-aware and understand where you are. Get a better understanding of yourself when it comes to showing empathy, and talk to your staff about this is the $1 million question. Is there anything you need more or less of from me? Because that may have changed during the pandemic. Now, I recognize we're a 1.5 years plus into this thing, but we have kind of done this, right? With the status of COVID, then vaccine, then Delta, then booster. I mean, we're kind of all over the place. And sometimes the needs of your employees have changed and you don't know it. This is a very scary question for leaders to ask. And so oftentimes we don't. But we don't want you to make assumptions about what your employees might need. We want you to ask them. And be a role model to the extent that you can. And if you're saying, work-life balance is important and I want to, be more understanding of where my employees are coming from, part of that requires opening yourself up a little bit too. Make sure you are practicing what you preach, staying up to date on safety and public health responses that are relevant to your team, and knowing how to engage in your own self-care, define your own boundaries about preferences regarding work hours, and that kind of thing. So if you are modeling that behavior, that is going to lead to greater understanding from your employees and from those of you around you. So here's this culture concept, and creating a culture that values empathy. What you measure is what you value. So if your organization only measures performance, it's missing out on these invaluable other things like employee engagement, satisfaction, retention, and diversity. And some of that has changed with COVID. We have asked a lot of people to alter course a little bit. Our environmental health director that works with us has been responsible for organizing all of the testing and vaccine clinics. Has nothing to do with what she does on a daily basis. So once the vaccination rates went up, positivity rates went down before the Delta variant came out, she actually got to do environmental health work again. And she was so excited. And now we've had this resurgence in North Carolina of the Delta variant. And now she's back to organizing vaccine clinics and testing sites. And so her employee engagement and satisfaction, she's not going anywhere. I know how long she's been there. But job duties have changed. Job expectations have changed. It's always good to check in. When you create policies, think about the unintended consequences for the people that you haven't consulted. Am I advocating that you do team decision making all the time? No, I'm not advocating for that. What I'm advocating is for you to think about what impact that whole putting yourself in someone else's shoes is also about what happens before you implement something. Okay? And that is where you won't have as big of a gap there if you actively seek that information prior to implementation. Okay? So really listen, put yourself in other people's shoes, really try to understand where they're coming from. Okay? I'm going to send this presentation to Nicole so that she has an opportunity to send it to all of you who participated. This is some of the sources that I used here. But I think in looking back, this slide right here is one of the most important, and that is listening to your employees, and recognizing when you do have a difference of understanding, working through that. And I think the difference between that people shy away from empathy is it sounds like you have to agree with what everybody's telling you. You certainly do not. You do, I think, have an obligation, and you have an obligation to understand your employees.